Anne Perry. This is her. She's the editorial director of adult fiction at Simon Schuster UK. She's also founded an award-winning review site called Pornokitsch, which publishes reviews and news concerning popular fiction.
No more.
No. And she's also won the Kim Scott Walwyn Award in 2014 and is a regular speaker at literary conventions both in the US and the UK. And today, Anne Perry will be talking about the relationship, well, you can see here, the relationship between social media, the internet, and publishing, with a specific focus on genre fiction and her experience as a woman in the publishing industry. So that's everything. I'm just going to leave it to you. But thank you very much for coming.
Thanks very much for having me. I know 6 o'clock in the evening on a Wednesday is kind of a lot to ask, so thanks very much for being here. So before I start, I want to start with a little caveat that, of course, this is publishing in the age of social media. I did not work in publishing before social media, so I can't give you any sort of like cool comparison or anything like that. I've heard stories. Sounds like an interesting time. Yeah. Also, before I began, I wanted to ask a few questions of everybody in the audience, which is, first of all, is anybody here an author? Self-published, traditional published, anything? Any wannabe authors? No one wants to. Okay. That's totally fine. It's like, it's no judgment, I'm just sort of curious. Does anybody work in the publishing industry? Does anybody write reviews, have a website, anything like that? Does anybody have a Twitter account? Yes. Instagram. Yep, there we go. Facebook. We're all like, totally deactivated yesterday. Right, so anyway, publishing in the age of social media. Subtitle, it's complicated. Right. So yes, my name is Anne Perry, and I decided that I would introduce myself with my Twitter banner. A couple of interesting facts that the eagle-eyed amongst you might pick up on. I've tweeted a few times over the years. I've got some followers, I follow some people, I've liked some things. I joined, it's hard to read, but I joined in May 2008. Twitter actually turns 10 years old today. Happy birthday, Twitter. Also, my bio reads, currently on a social media holiday, back eventually, maybe, which is like, why are you then giving us a presentation about being a publisher on social media when you were currently on a social media holiday? So, like every great storyteller, you're going to have to wait until the end of the presentation to find out why I am currently on a social media holiday. Anyway, let's see. So, publishing and social media. Social media is a way for publishers to talk to audiences and for readers to talk to publishers. It's an incredibly powerful tool. It's a way for authors and publishers and retailers to see and hear what readers think and feel about their books, and vice versa. We can see why it is that, when I say we, I speak as a publisher, why readers buy books, where they buy books, what books they buy, why they buy them. And then we can see how they read their books, how they talk about their books, how they recommend their books. So that's all fantastic stuff. And what it means is we can learn a lot from social media, which, like, in short, it seems like publishing and social media are the perfect match. I was going a little crazy last night, so we'll move on to the informative PowerPoint. Social media is a powerful tool, as I said. So it allows us as publishers to see and hear what readers have to say about books, how they interact with books, and how they interact with each other. It also gives publishers the opportunity to then identify an audience for a book, talk directly to that audience with the goal of selling those readers more books. And it does all of that while costing relatively very little. 1, 2, and 3 at the top here, since I see it turned into 1, 2, and 3 at the bottom. That's basically a way of talking about consumer insight. Consumer insight is, of course, a way for us to look into what readers are. We can do deep dives into who's reading a particular genre, where they're reading it, where they're buying their books, how they're buying them, whether they buy them on Amazon or Waterstones or whatever. Several publishers, including Hachette, for example, have expensive, sort of big, fancy consumer insight groups that actually work within the entire company, where they actually do huge reports, sort of detailing who's buying, for example, science fiction and fantasy books, who's buying women's fiction, where they're buying them, how old they are, where they live in the UK, what else they buy, etc., etc. There's free stuff online too, but I'll get to that in a minute. Just to sort of give you an example of some consumer insight, if you've never really had a chance to see it before, here's one of my favorites. This is from a website called ugov.org. It's a brilliant tool. It is run by the government, but basically they send out surveys to thousands upon thousands of people in the UK about the most random stuff. I'm a member. I fill out my surveys once a week because I think they're amazing. I filled out surveys about everything from Jeremy Corbyn to James Bond. So this particular bit of consumer insight, which again, absolutely fantastic stuff, tells us about readers on various tube lines. So for example, people on the circle line tend to read more science, language, and literary criticism than they do horror and biography, so on and so forth. So, you know, if I were a publisher who had some really, really big novel that, say, was a science fiction novel that I really wanted to get some tube advertising for, I could, you know, look at this and be like, you know what? Science fiction and fantasy, let's try the Bakerloo line and see if I could get my tube ads up there, or get them actually onto the trade. Of course, that requires a really big budget, which we'll get to later. But you know, there you go. That's one of the uses of consumer insight. It's also just very, very interesting, you know, academically. This is another slide with information I got from YouGov. I created it for a presentation I gave to my American colleagues last year, trying to explain who crime and thriller readers are in the UK. So you can probably imagine how much fun it was explaining what the importance is of dinner, tea, and supper. But again, you can see all sorts of interesting stuff here. 72% of crime and thriller readers like or really like Amazon Kindle, which is above the national average. 74% are on Facebook, 31% on Twitter. So all of that, totally fascinating stuff. The thing is, it costs a lot of money to get that kind of deep dive information from places like, even like YouGov. There's some free stuff there, but by and large you have to pay for it. So, social media gives us free consumer insight. Social media is just the most wonderful stuff in the world because I can learn all sorts of amazing things about the audience I'm going to try and publish a book to by just going online and sort of poking around. So all of these slides here, or all of these pictures are from presentations that I've given in the last couple of years where I was trying to put a cover on a book, or give my sales team some information that they would be able to use to publish or to sell in a book to retailers. So I'll go through them all sort of like one by one, just for fun. Pinterest. What I wanted to do was rebrand a women's fiction author. She's a best-selling author, but her covers all kind of look the same. And 5 years ago, they looked kind of fresh. Now they look a little old-fashioned. So we put together a task force. We met every 2 weeks, and as part of this task force, I would make a little presentation about how women's fiction readers who read similar authors to this women's fiction author interact with her competitors on Pinterest. So there was that, you may or may not be able to see, but that was when I was just searching for JoJo Moyes. I wanted to show not just what her cover look is, but how her readers respond to those covers, what they're taking away from them. Tumblr, I gave a presentation about trends, and I was making a not particularly specious argument about how in 2018 llamas are the new unicorns. So I searched Tumblr and just used some information from Tumblr there. But also I like llamas, which is why there's an extra llama here on the page. Instagram. I published a book a couple of years ago called The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. That is that book. I wanted to use the cover to prove to people that science fiction novels can reach a wider audience if they have a different level of cover than the usual sort of spaceships. So I went on to Instagram and I found the way that people were interacting with the cover, the way they were showing the cover off, as a way of bolstering my argument. Goodreads, this one was kind of fun. So this author, John Sanford, he's an American author, he's a bestseller. He has published about 40 books since 1989. My current employer, Simon Schuster, has the entire backlist. We publish the entire backlist. He continues to publish frontlist titles, which means new titles every year. 40 books is a lot to wrap your head around. And the thing is that part of our job as his publisher in the UK is to keep going back to retailers like Waterstones and W.H. Smith and Independence or whoever and saying, I know this guy publishes a lot of books, but everybody likes him, and you should just continue to carry his books so people can keep buying them. And so what I did, just out of curiosity one day, was I went on to Goodreads and I counted up all of the ratings for all 40 of his titles. And the number, if you're curious, was 750,000 ratings across all 40 titles, which is a really, really nice figure to have on a sales sheet that my sales reps can then take to Waterstones and Indies or whoever and be like, so, John Sanford, lots of people really like him. Finally, DeviantArt is sort of a weird one. I realize it's not traditional social media. Does everybody know what DeviantArt is? Yeah. Okay, so a couple of years ago, I had the really, really brilliant opportunity to put a new jacket on Frank Herbert's novel Dune, which of course is a seminal work of science fiction. So the previous cover was this awful, really anonymous like explosion. It was super weird. And what I needed to do was go to my boss and make a case for why it was that we should put a really cool cover on this book. I mean, this book's 50 years old. We only get this opportunity once every 50 years, so let's really make an effort here. So I went on to DeviantArt to see what fans of the book have done to illustrate the book, just for fun. If you're not familiar with Dune, it takes place on a desert planet, and they're like giant worms burrowing through the sand. Anyway, we found a guy who did a really beautiful piece of work on DeviantArt. So I actually took it to the cover meeting and said, I want something like this. And everybody turned around and they're like, well, why don't you just use that? So we got in touch with the artist and he was amenable. And, oh, there we go. That was the cover. It sold incredibly well. And in fact, I was putting together the pictures for the slideshow today. I did an image search and I ran into this on Etsy, which you can't tell. Somebody took a high-res picture of our cover, up to and including the phrase 50th anniversary edition, scanned it in, and printed it out in black and white, perplexingly, on a piece of A4. They're selling it for $20 on Etsy. So I'm going to take that as a win. Right, okay, so anyway. This might be my favorite slide of the entire presentation. Social media, YouTube. We haven't really talked about that yet. Publishers do use YouTube, and one of my favorite examples of the way publishers use YouTube to talk about books is not book trailers, which we'll talk about more later. I'm not a big fan of book trailers. But Harlequin, which of course is a romance publisher, a really, really big romance publisher, sort of the US equivalent of Mills & Boon, makes little videos. They're short, about 1 minute and 15, 20 seconds long each. Make a date with a Viking. Make a date with a cowboy. Make a date with, the most recent one, a Highlander. If anybody's familiar with American romance fiction, Vikings, Highlanders, and cowboys tend to sort of, shall we say, over-index in interest. So what they're doing is they're playing to their audience. But they are really cute videos. And also this one, which they put up 11 months ago, has had 45,000 views, which may not feel like a lot in the era of millions upon millions of views for really big sort of social media stars, for example. But I cannot think of another book trailer that has had a quarter of those views ever. So it's a really good use of YouTube. It's really cute, it's really creative, it's good for sort of branding Harlequin, and it just sort of makes you feel good. It gets a laugh from the audience. It's great stuff. So the next thing I want to do is take a deep dive into the social media aspects of a book that I think was published really well last year. And that is Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough, published by HarperCollins. Anybody read this? Anybody aware of it? No? Okay. Well, it's fine. There are no wrong answers in publishing. It's great. So, Behind Her Eyes was one of the most creative campaigns I saw last year, just full stop. It had really strong branding from the beginning. It had really strong messaging. There's a call to arms. So this is the front up here, and this is the back of the advanced reading copy, the proof that was sent out to reviewers and bloggers and journalists ahead of time to sort of get people excited about the book. They have elements from the cover, which again, this is the cover. So they have an element from the cover, which is the smoke across the proof. They use the same typeface and the same colorway, but what they do is they say, don't trust yourself, don't trust the story, don't trust the book, and whatever you do, don't give away that ending. And that, don't give away the ending, something is going on with the ending of this book. That's the major message behind everything that they did. You also might notice that there's a hashtag down here on a couple of these things. WTF that ending. Excuse me. So what the fuck that ending? What the fuck that ending? That was their message. What the fuck that ending? And the thing is, that wound up everywhere if you were paying attention. Twitter, it was all over Twitter. So they first started giving away the proofs for this book in the summer of 2016. I started seeing this this hashtag on Twitter pretty much right away. It's sort of slowed down a bit now, but it's still there. People are still using it, they read the book, they talk to each other, they, by and large, don't give away the ending, but they do say, either positively or negatively, what the hell is going on with that ending. And what's interesting about that in particular is that, nobody's read the book, I'm not going to spoil the book, the ending is controversial. It's not that it is a twist, but it's a weird twist. And what they did was they took that and they made it not just a strength, but they made it the main pillar of their entire strategy for marketing and selling this book, and that's brilliant stuff. So, what the fuck that ending? All over Twitter and Instagram. Everybody loves hashtags on Instagram, so there's a lot, but it's in there. YouTube, once again, I like the way people were sort of staging their, I don't know if you call them like covers, album covers for YouTube, you know, the stills that are at the beginning when you Google it, but anyway. That's an American one, which is why there's a different cover, but yes, again, it's all over YouTube, again, with that hashtag. Right, so, really creative use of that hashtag, really interesting the way it got people talking, and one of the things, so, as I mentioned, one of the things that they did was they used Instagram, and that is particularly important for today's sort of talk, in part because Instagram is sort of overtaking Twitter in importance, I think, in marketing books on social media. So this is from HarperCollins, who of course is the publisher of the book. What they did was they hired a well-known Instagrammer named Arima, who goes by Pardon My Writings. What they did was they had her photograph, sort of set up and photograph the book. I think it's called a flat lay. It's sort of a top-down product photograph where it's done quite beautifully, arranged very nicely, and she's well known for it. She has more than 10,000 followers on Instagram because she's so good at this. And she gets hired by a lot of publishers to do these for their books. So they hired her, they had her photograph the book, and then they published it on their Instagram. They gave her credit, I mean, it's right there at the very top. She retweeted it, it was fantastic. There are a couple of other really interesting things about the way this Instagram sort of this particular publisher's Instagram works. My favorite is, of course, the hashtags, which by and large is sort of what you might expect. Books, Bookstagram, Instabook, IG book, IG reads, currently reading, am reading, TBR, and bibliophile. All sort of makes sense. But there are two here that I really like. Am writing, which I like that because obviously the book is written, like what are they doing? Except for the fact if you look a little more closely at this photograph, there are two moleskin notebooks and a pen here, which I don't know if they asked her to do that or she did it for fun or what, but it's an interesting sort of response and again sort of suggests like the creative process of writing a book. Anyway, people obviously do search am writing as a hashtag on lots of things. So that was very interesting to them. And then, of course, flat lay, which is the style of the photograph, and what she, Pardon My Writings, is known for. And so what they're doing there is they're trying to get people who are just looking for beautiful photographs on Instagram. I think it's really interesting. Yes, and it did pretty well. 458 likes, I mean, that's good for a publisher. Right, a little more on Instagram before we move on. Is anybody familiar with a blog tour? Okay, a blog tour is a favorite tool of publicists and marketers in publishing. When a book publishes, what they do is they set up a blog tour where they have, the publicist will get in touch with a few sort of blog reviewers and ask them if they would be involved on publication week or around publication week, and they host content. They might host an essay from the author, they might publish a review of the book, they might do some sort of cover reveal or do a little extra content or run a contest, but they're doing something about that book on a day and they're, that maybe have 5 days worth of content spread out across 5 different blogs as for Caravelle. I am happy to go on record to tell you that I hate them. I think that they are a waste of everybody's time, and I don't think that they particularly raise awareness of books, much less sell any. So, enter Instagram. HarperCollins has been leading the charge with something called an Instagram book tour, which is basically the same thing. A friend of mine in marketing, not at HarperCollins, but somewhere else, says it's like a blog tour, but people actually see it. Guarantees a drip feed of photos on key accounts. So the book here is a book called City of Brass. It's sort of a YA sort of tilted fantasy novel, really beautiful. Obviously, it's a gorgeous cover. These are beautiful photographs. I mean, my goodness. And what happens is they get in touch with Instagrammers ahead of time. They set up the tour. They use the hashtag so that people who are following the tour can follow from account to account. And also, this is my favorite, they have a contest running. And the rules are, follow both HarperCollins UK, again the publisher, and me, whoever the hosting Instagrammer is, like this photo, comment with the city and country you might live in, which of course tells HarperCollins where you are. Consumer insight. Tag 2 friends who might be interested. And that's it. Giveaway ends. Blah, blah, blah. That is a fascinating kind of giveaway because they are getting so much out of it. And of course, got Instagrammers who are like, man, that looks awesome. I'm gonna enter that giveaway and see if I can win a copy. Right, so I think that is absolutely fantastic. So everything I've said right now makes it sound like social media is just a magical panacea for everything, right? Like, what is it complicated? This seems amazing. Well, publishers' use of social media is fast, cheap, and out of control. And I would just like everybody to admire how incredibly 90s this poster is. I found it this morning. I'm like, oh my god, that is so 97. Yeah, so Behind Her Eyes was successful for a number of reasons. Its social media was incredible, and as I said, I have a great deal of respect for the way they used social media in Behind Her Eyes when they were marketing and publicizing that book. But its social media wasn't automatically successful because, for example, all social media is automatically successful. It's not. And it wasn't successful because it was particularly clever. It was, but that doesn't guarantee success. Its social media campaign was successful because it was one prong in a many-pronged fork. It was part of a strategy that was developed a year and a half, 2 years before the book was published. As soon as that manuscript was acquired, the marketing publicity team sat down with sales, sat down with editorial. Basically, a group of people at HarperCollins sat down and started thinking about what they could do to make this book sell really well. And that's really important to keep in mind. Another thing that's important to keep in mind is the fact that for many books and authors, social media is the one and only prong in their marketing and publicity. It is a toothpick. A prong. I was trying to find a fork with a single prong. I'm like, yeah, it's a toothpick. Right, so the problem with that is that about 100 with a single prong, and that prong is social media, and that means there's a lot of social media about books out there. The problem then becomes the fact that publishers, and I don't just mean big 5 publishers or independent publishers, I include self-published authors in this. I mean, everybody who's publishing a book out there, they're relying on social media. For a lot of the reasons that I've already mentioned, it is relatively inexpensive and you can do clever stuff with it. But a couple of things I've also mentioned, because it, for example, is very quick and it's very cheap. So there we go. I spoiled my own slide. So yes, social media is fast, cheap, and out of control because publishers rely very, very heavily on it. Social media becomes background noise as a consequence of that, and also sort of as a corollary, as we all know, social media can be kind of an unfriendly place. Right, so the Iron Triangle. I don't know if anybody's familiar with something called the Project Management Triangle. I like calling it the Iron Triangle. That's another name for it. Here's what it looks like on Wikipedia, which doesn't really tell you anything. The quality of the work is constrained by the project's budget, the project management, or Iron Triangle tells you. Quality is constrained by cost, scope, and schedule. The project manager has to trade between cost, scope, and schedule, and in order to do so, constraining on one necessarily necessitates changes in the others to compensate for quality. That sort of makes sense. Or this. Good, cheap, and fast, pick two. The point is that if you have something that's good and fast, it's not going to be inexpensive. If you want something that's fast and cheap, it might not be very good. And if you want something cheap and good, it's not going to happen quickly. And we can talk about that more at length afterwards during the question and answer session, but I think it's a really important thing for us to keep in our minds as we move forward with the complicated parts of social media as a publishing tool. So none of these combinations are inherently bad. And to explain why, I'm going to cycle back in a bit of my own personal history. I got my start in publishing completely accidentally, a little more than 10 years ago, when my husband and I started this review site, Pornokitsch, which was a terrible name in retrospect. Such a bad name, everybody thought we were publishing pornography. We weren't. It was a review site where we talked about Star Wars. Right? So it started out as a blog where we talked about stuff because it was 2007 and that's what we did. And it turned into a review blog, and then publishers noticed that we were reviewing books, and they started getting in touch and offering us, review copies of things. So we started publishing more reviews, and it kind of developed from there. A few years after that, we founded a small literary award. So there's Pornokitsch. We founded a small literary award, the Kitschis, and then a few years after that, we founded a small press, Jurassic London. That was our call-upon, little dinosaur. All three of which, Pornokitsch, the Kitschis, and Jurassic London, we had no budget for. So we use social media a lot because that's what we had the time and the energy to do and the money for. It allowed us to talk directly to people who might consume our content, who might care about our award, and who might eventually buy our books. And then also that we established a community that was enthusiastic and supportive, and it was all fantastic. But the thing is, in 2007, we were sort of the front wave of that. In 2018, we're not. Everyone has social media accounts, and they have like all the social media accounts. And by everyone, I mean, so that's the Simon Schuster UK Twitter account, Penguin Random House YouTube channel. Darling Anderson is a literary agency, so there's their official company Twitter account. Each agent also has their own Twitter account. That's my personal Facebook up there. The Right Stuff is a Twitter account for the rights department at Hodder and Stoughton. Picador, this is the Instagram banner for Picador Books, which is an imprint of Penn Macmillan. And then, of course, there's #Hawk, who is sort of a spam account. No, he's not a spam account. He's a... can't think of the word. Anyway, if you don't follow him on Twitter, you should, because he's very mean. It's great. Everyone is on social media in publishing. Anyone who is remotely involved in publishing books is on social media. I haven't even started with the number of retailers who are also on social media, but they're there too. Every Waterstones in this country has their own social media account. Lots of people who work in Waterstones have their own social media accounts. All the indies have social media accounts. I mean, it's everywhere. We all know everybody's got social media. So do authors. I picked up a couple of big ones just because these are very well known. Of course, John Green and his brother have a famous YouTube channel. Michael Chabon is, if you Google, not that I do this, if you Google famous authors with good Instagram accounts, he usually comes up at the top of the list. John Grisham and his Facebook account. Lee Child and his website, which, interestingly, Lee Child is the author, Jack Reacher is the famous character, so obviously they make Jack Reacher the big name. Stephen King on Twitter. So, we in publishing want our authors to be on social media. This is what we're ingrained to believe is the right thing to do. We want our authors to have Twitter accounts, we want them to have Facebook pages, we want them to have websites, we want them to have Instagram accounts, we want them to have all the social media in the world, and we want them to use it. We in publishing are also encouraged to have our own social media accounts and use them, so sort of like, as per this sort of page of stuff. In addition to sort of like big corporate social media accounts, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people in publishing have individual sort of private Twitter account, well, personal Twitter accounts, not private, that they also use to talk about their books. A lot. And the thing is that we all tweet and retweet and reblog and retumble and respond to each other. It turns into a giant, giant chain of people just talking to each other about books. And there's not a lot of sort of sensibility about how to use social media right. So for example, I have a colleague who's an editor, or a friend who's an editor at another publishing house, and she's an earnest Twitter user. She believes that Twitter is there as a tool, so every single morning she gets into work, fires up her computer, goes onto Twitter, searches for a couple of the books that she's publishing, and then retweets every single positive tweet she can find about them. I haven't muted or blocked her on Twitter because she's my friend, and I like to see her when she's talking about real things. But, you know, I like to see what she's saying when she's talking about things that aren't that book that she's obsessed with that day. But this like waterfall of retweets that she does, they can last for up to 20 minutes, and she might do it several times a day. It's deadening. I mean, it's gotten to the point where I just turn off, where I was just turning off Twitter when it happened and then going back an hour later. Now, of course, I just don't use Twitter. So, my point is that social media is full of authors and publishers shouting about books, and by and large, they are shouting to each other. I mean, how many people in this room follow multiple or any publishers or authors or anything on Twitter? Do you see a lot of book talk, or do you see no book talk? No book talk. Yeah, it's because we're all talking to each other. Yeah, it's great. And that's a problem. Like, obviously, that is a major problem. So, in addition to that, oh, right, I'm not quite there yet. In addition to that, most books have some sort of social media profile, and it is because we're all talking to each other about books. Anyway, has anybody, so moving on to the next corollary, social media is not a great place sometimes. Has anybody had a bad experience on social media? Yes, okay. I have two. I'm going to tell you a couple of my stories just because it's fun. So, on Tumblr about a year ago, I said something negative about a film, and I had somebody respond that they were going to murder me. Yeah, what I said was something along the lines of, I think this film is fine, but a little overrated. I didn't say it's a trash heap that should die on fire. I said it's fine, but overrated. I had somebody who felt so strongly about that, even as a joke. Some total stranger that they felt like telling me that I should die because of it. They were going to be the agent of that death. So, I mean, that was a weird experience. Obviously, it wasn't a real death threat, but it was still weird. I posted something on Pornokitsch where I made a short joke, blog joke, about what it would be like to date various men in Jane Austen novels. I got the very humbling, this happens a lot, I got the very humbling, is that supposed to be funny? On Twitter. So that's great. Most recently, and this is my favorite social media moment of all, and I mean that genuinely. Most recently, I posted something, it was a very, very short article, again on my personal blog, but I've made it, it's no secret that I am also an editor at Simon Schuster. I made a joke on my blog about Boba Fett. I got this response. It says you're an idiot. That's it. It was very succinct. The fact that somebody took the time to register with TypePad to let me know I'm an idiot. So that was great. Which brings me to why it is that I'm not on social media. It's not because people are mean to me on social media. I promise. I genuinely don't really mind any of that. I haven't had a bad experience. I certainly haven't had the terrible experiences that we've all read about in the last couple of years. That hasn't happened, thank God. What I have had is this. I follow 794 people on Twitter. A couple of days ago, I think it was Monday, when I was preparing for this talk, and I wanted to make this point. I was like, I have to actually count how many book people I follow on Twitter so I can actually talk about the fact that book noise on Twitter is super loud if you're in the book industry, and it's really kind of overwhelming. 605 of my 794 people on Twitter. That, for context, 76% of the people I follow on Twitter. Here's a pie chart because I like pie charts. 76%. I'm 5'3" tall. 76% is 4 feet. That's how much of me, if I were my Twitter followers, is made up of book people. Not so much noise. It's so much talking about books. And Twitter should be bigger and better and bolder than that. But I also find that I feel really guilty if I want to, like, mute or unfollow someone on Twitter. If I mute someone, I still see them retweeting I still see those people retweeted by other people. If I unfollow them, what if they notice something bad? What if a retailer who's, like, you know, really important notices that I've unfollowed them on Twitter and they get really pissed about it? It's happened. I mean, people do notice when you unfollow them if they've got one of those programs, and they then subtweet it, and then somebody sends you the subtweet, and then you're like, oh my god. So yeah. Let's see. Right, how do we walk the line between the incredibly powerful tool that social media is and the agent of kind of noisy chaos that can be kind of noisy, occasionally mini chaos? Right. First of all, we have to remember that there is no such thing as a free lunch. This is a basic tenet of economic theory. Social media is not free. It seems free because it doesn't, you know, immediately cost us obvious money. I don't have to, like, pay £1 every time I tweet something. But maybe I should. But it still costs someone somewhere in terms of time and energy. And one of the reasons publishers rely so heavily on social media is because of its apparent freeness. And we need to stop thinking about it that way. It's not free. We need to develop best practices. My friend who spends 20 minutes a day tweeting about her books, she needs to stop. But more than that, we need to understand how to use social media right and why it's important to do that. Not just to keep authors, for example, from arguing with their fans on their Amazon review pages, which does happen, but to keep people from spamming everybody's Twitter feeds with retweets about a book that they're never going to read. Social media is not going to go anywhere. I mean, we're still going to use it. It's still really powerful. So we need to start hiring specialists. This is becoming more normal now. When I started at my first publishing company a few years ago, we did not have any social media specialists. They hired one about a year after I started. Just to sort of make a point about why it is important to hire specialists. A, you may remember that Instagram page that HarperCollins did where they hired the photographer to take a picture and then they used her picture. That's great, and they were able to use it in a really creative way to get a few more views for what would otherwise be kind of publishing spam. Another reason to hire specialists is, I realize this is not traditional sort of social media, this is website, but same sort of like rules apply. This is the Penguin Random House website. It's really slick, it works really well, it looks good, it's user-friendly. I mean, it's just a nice website. This is not the Penguin Random House backend. Everybody knows what I mean, right? Yeah, okay. It's just a random one that I found online, but I figured that I would use it anyway because this just makes my eyes cross. And I'm like reasonably familiar with, you know, basic programming, so this shouldn't sort of make my heart want to stop beating, but it does. The thing is, when I started at my first job in publishing, my publisher, my employers, had just spent a lot of money on a really, really slick website. Kind of like Penguin Random House, but a little busier. And once they built it, they didn't hire anybody to populate it. They decided that what they were going to do was just have all their employees populate it. And by all their employees, I mean editorial. And by editorial, I mean all the assistants. At the time I was an assistant, so yes. So what they did was they had one of the developers basically teach a super user in editorial, who was another assistant, how to upload content to this incredibly complicated website. And then she was supposed to teach all the rest of us. And this, as you can imagine, was a big money-saving sort of like effort, which in retrospect seems completely ludicrous given the amount of money that they spent on the website itself. They totally cheaped out on how they were actually going to put content on the website. So in order for us to put covers, back cover copy, author photographs, press releases, you know, basic stuff for a publishing website, on the website, we had to go through a 4-step process of pages that looked like this. It was completely non-intuitive. Nobody had any idea what they were doing. And nobody else who worked in editorial had any programming background whatsoever. And when I say like programming background, I'm like, I know how to do italics and HTML. Nobody even knew that. So it was terrifying to them. So as you can imagine, nobody did it. So nobody did it, and then we all got sort of shouted at by various people higher up on the chain. So we went back saying, well, this isn't our job. We're editorial. Like, this should be marketing or publicity. But of course, marketing and publicity were like, this isn't our job. We actually have marketing and publicity jobs to do. So what they should have done was, you know, hire someone to actually fill the website. But they didn't. And in the end, they were actually able to build something where they took content from our internal cataloging system and used it to feed out to the website, which more or less worked. So the stopgap. But it was not great. So yes, my point is, hire specialists. Hire the Instagrammer. Hire someone to populate your website. Finally, never forget the iron triangle. If your budget means you only have the use of social media to promote your book, nothing else. You can't buy, you know, advertisements on the tube, you know, the big posters that you see across the tube tracks. Those are very expensive, and they're usually outside the budget of 99.9% of books that publishers publish. If you can't afford that, if all you can do is social media, be thoughtful in how you use social media, is my advice to publishers, and obviously everybody in this room. But, for example, you know, consider giving up speed. You don't be so reactive. Just like make it good. Make it. Anyway, so yes, don't forget the iron triangle. Be thoughtful in the way that you use social media. I would not have the career that I have if it were not for social media. It taught me the basics of networking. It gave me a chance to develop my voice as a writer. On my blog, which actually is quite useful because I also write back cover copy for books now that I acquire and publish. It gave me a chance to develop and discover and develop my publishing niche. I specialize in science fiction and fantasy and crime and thrillers. It allowed me to meet people in that niche, which has been invaluable as I've moved forward in my career. And it allows me to keep up to date on what my competitors are doing. I don't work for HarperCollins. I watched all of the behind your eyes stuff just from the perspective of an audience member, and I thought it was great stuff. And most importantly, it gives me valuable insight into my readers. So I suppose the entire point, my entire long spiel here, is just to say that we have to make our time on social media count as publishers, because as you have now discovered by this talk, we're only talking to ourselves on social media, and that's not doing it. So that is publishing in the age of social media. Thank you very much. Any questions?
But, so the second point is I really love the cover for Becky Chambers' book.
Oh, great.
Absolutely fantastic.
Thanks.
And also going back to Becky Chambers as a sort of self-published author as well. I know you guys were involved with Mark Lawrence's self-published fantasy book off
Yes, that's true.
Pornokitsch. And I was wondering if you guys at Simon Schuster ever tried to grab some of these guys, or if you're aware of any other of these sort of more guerrilla campaigns and trying to get more self-published authors out there, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really interesting question with lots and lots of points to bring up, and I'll sort of try and stick to the really big and interesting ones. So Becky Chambers, sadly, still under contract to Potter. As soon as she's not, yeah, we'll have that discussion then. Mark Lawrence and the Fantasy Book Blog Off. So that was where Mark Lawrence was a fantasy author and is very supportive of self-published authors. What he does is he's put together a group of reviewers, so Pornokitsch and various other sort of blog sites, and they review self-published fantasy novels to find, the one room to rule them all. And two of the fantasy novels that they found last year have since gotten publishing deals. And I don't think I'm betraying any confidences when I say that one this year has already gotten a publishing deal. So it is a really good way to get published publishers to pay attention to self-published books. In part because it means that what the publishers are doing is they're reading the reviews, and they know they can trust the reviewers, and that makes them then go read the book and sort of see how they feel about the book. So publishers do quite a lot in terms of open submissions, first of all. So I'm running an open submissions right now through Simon Schuster. I ran one through Hotter a couple of years ago. John Murray has open submissions going right now. Glance has one that goes every year. Harper Voyager had one at the beginning of this year. Publishers are always looking for an interesting self-published author or unpublished author. And so there's definitely an understanding that there are a lot of really interesting authors out there who might not appeal to a traditional agent, which is sort of a discussion for another day. That would take us another hour, but that could be really good. Becky Chambers is a really good example of that. So The Long Windows from Every Planet began life as a kickstarted self-published novel. I met the author at a convention. I read the book a couple of months later, and then I acquired the book and published it. And it's done quite well since then. And she didn't have an agent. She had an agent. The agent hadn't been able to get a deal for her. The agent then left agenting, and she didn't have anybody else pick her up. So that's why she didn't have an agent. It was kind of a hard sell because it's a lovely book, but it doesn't have a traditional structure, and not in sort of a literary sense where it happens backwards and there are no pronouns or anything. It's just not a traditional book. It's just a very warm, gentle, slow book. And so it didn't find the same appeal for agents that really high concept book with a really snappy hook, like two serial killers walk into a bar, one walks out. Just think that out. You can have three. Like that's a really snappy hook. That means that the agent can be like, I can send this to like 5 editors who are going to just jump on it because that's such a snappy hook. It makes it so easy to sell. It's really hard to sell a book where you have to stand there and say things like, so it's a science fiction novel, but it doesn't have a traditional structure, and doesn't have an agent, and it's kickstarted. It doesn't really have a plot, but it's really nice, and you kind of want to hug it when you're done with it. That's hard to sell. Yes, and so to bring it back to your original question, we keep an eye on Amazon rankings for self-published books. Amazon kind of has the self-published market locked down right now. They pick up a lot of self-published stuff, and they put it into Kindle Unlimited, which again is a talk for another day. But that means that it's a little harder to sort of like sneak in and be like, hey, self-published author, I see that you have no agent and no publisher, but your book is great, I'll give you a deal. Because either they really like the royalties they're getting from Amazon, or they are just happy with what they're doing with Amazon. But we are aware, and we do pay attention, and occasionally something like that Chambers does happen, and we're all happy.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Is there another question? Yes, in the back.
You talked about developing best practices and hiring specialists, but that's not going to stop authors from going up and doing their own thing.
Well,
so
yeah.
How are publishers working with authors to educate them? Is that a
So
process?
So the best practices definitely has to be shared with both authors and publishers. And the thing is, you're always going to have authors who go rogue. You're always going to have an author who's like, some asshole just said something really mean about my book on Amazon in the reviews, and I'm going to go in there and explain to them why they're wrong. And also, so is my mom and the dog. That doesn't happen. Like, I make light of it, but it happens a lot. And it's hard. It's hard to be in a position where you want your author to be happy, and you don't want to criticize your author too much. But when you see them getting into a Twitter fight, for example, there sort of comes a point where you have to, obviously, figure out how you're going to deal with that, especially when the really big Twitter fights. If anybody remembers, Stephen Leather from a couple of years ago got into a bit of trouble. So Stephen Leather is a thriller writer, and he got into some trouble because he was accused of using sock puppets to attack other writers on social media. And it got quite a lot of media, traditional media, and put his publishers in kind of an awkward position. And he doesn't have an agent, so they couldn't go through the agent. Very often, your first port of call as an editor when your author is doing something that's kind of problematic is to go to the agent first and be like, hey, you need to present a united front about this. let's talk about how we're going to deal with it, develop a plan, and go from there. So the first and most important thing is to try and educate authors from the beginning of your contract with them. So the moment you acquire a book, or within, as soon as possible after acquiring a book, to either take your author out to lunch, or send them a nice welcoming email with an attachment that is, welcome to publishing, welcome to the company, welcome to some guidelines about how to use social media. But to have those conversations with them. I think that agents, I don't know how many agents have those conversations with their authors also, ahead of or in addition to submitting books to publishers to be published or to be acquired. But that needs to happen also. So it really does need to be a fairly sweeping institutional change. And I don't know if it's ever actually going to happen sort of across the board, but it certainly would help, and it would help quite a bit to try and make publishers and authors just be a little more thoughtful about social media instead of doing the thing we all do, which is to be like, I hate this person, I'm going to respond right now. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I wanted to ask how, because you said that you kind of got into publishing by accident because you first started Pornokitsch and then it happened, and I wanted to kind of ask how it happened exactly.
No problem. So I was working on a PhD, and so I was working on a PhD for an American university, and shock American, probably couldn't tell by my accent, but I was working on a PhD for an American university. I was living here with my husband. And he works in advertising, and he went freelance. And so I was sitting at home writing, and he was sitting at home writing. And the two of us have a lot of energy, and we're not very good with time. So when we have a lot of time on our hands, we get kind of antsy. So we basically, it started, so the Pornokitsch, the blog, actually started because we watched a Sean Connery film from the 80s called Outlander, which is actually quite good. It's sort of high noon in space, so highly recommended. We were watching Outlander, and we got into a long discussion about the aesthetics of the film and the fact that science fiction from the late 70s to the mid 80s looked a certain way. Like the way that Aliens looks, it's sort of like grimy and gritty. Star Wars has it too. Everything looks a little worn. It's like 80s aesthetics, but just kind of moldy. And so we sat there over beers and had this long, really important conversation about all that. We're like, we should write this shit down. And thus was the blog born. And then a couple of years later, when I was sort of standing there staring at my computer and he was freelancing and we had all this time on our hands, we had always talked sort of jokingly about starting a small press. And all of a sudden we had the time to do it. So we're like, let's do it, let's try it. So that's how that started. And then a year after that, so I was still working on the PhD, and we put out several books through the small press. I really enjoyed it, and then I saw on Facebook a job opening for an assistant editor in science fiction and fantasy. I was like, well, we might as well try, there's no one at the job. And I did, and that's how I went into publishing. But a total accident. I never intended to go into publishing. Obviously it's great. So, question in the back? Yes.
Yeah, one was going to be, you mentioned sort of Amazon reviews and
Sure.
then stealing unpublished. Force for good, force for bad. Does the good outweigh the bad with these huge companies like Amazon? And there's another one after which is slightly.
Oh, Amazon.
Turn your phone off so the microphones can't hear you.
I hardly even know where to begin with Amazon. Like, publishing, when Amazon sort of first entered the scene in, what, the late 90s, really? When did I start buying books on Amazon? Late 90s, early 2000s. So Amazon started with books, and publishers embraced that. Publishers were like, this is fantastic. We can basically sell straight to readers. We don't have to go through bookstores. But of course, what publishers weren't doing was thinking in terms of data capture and consumer insight. They were just like, this is fantastic. We'll just give the books to another company to sell, and that company will sell them, and nothing could go wrong. But of course, what Amazon was doing was they were keeping every single bit of the data that they got from selling those books straight to readers, and everything else that they were selling, and they kept it. And of course, you may or may not know, but Amazon is very, how should I put this? Amazon really likes to keep its data to itself, so it does not like to share its data with publishers. And it wasn't until sort of late in the game, relatively speaking, that publishers realized that actually one of the reasons that Amazon, when it got into self-publishing, the reason that self-published authors were doing well on Amazon was that, or the books that Amazon was publishing itself, for example, they were doing better on Amazon than traditionally published books because Amazon had more access to the data about who might buy the book, and so they were able to tailor what they were, the way they marketed and sold the book just on Amazon, just that one page on Amazon, from the title to the copy to the cover, to get a particular kind of reader. And they already knew that that reader was on Amazon buying books, so they just tailored exactly what they wanted that reader, what they thought that reader wanted with the book. That was a really complicated sentence, but hopefully you got the drift of what I was saying. And on the one hand, boy, I have no idea, that's such a tough question. There's a lot of good that happens with Amazon. The fact that you have self-published books that can do really, really well. I mean, you have self-published authors who, through Amazon, can make tens of thousands of pounds in a month off the royalties from self-publishing ebooks. And, you know, they can have an entire career, an entire life without having to support themselves through a traditional 9-to-5 job. That's amazing, and it means that all of a sudden that there are readers out there who are finding the kind of niche books that they want, and not necessarily, I don't mean like super weird niche stuff, like it's extremely specific, sort of like samurais who have pig noses and fight in the mountains, sort of that kind of super niche. I just mean people who like a particular kind of extremely niche fantasy, for example. They just like swords and sandals. That's all they want. All they want to do is read a lot of books where, you know, barbarians wear sandals and have swords. All of a sudden, they have a place where they have kind of an infinite supply of that to buy. And that's amazing. And as a reader, that makes me really happy. As a publisher, of course, Amazon is totally evil and terrifying. And I make light of it, but the fact is that Amazon is always 3 steps ahead of us. And they always will be. And the terrifying part for publishing is the fact that we all kind of know, to some degree or another, Amazon doesn't care about books. They use books as a bellwether to experiment with data analysis and market analysis and figuring out better ways to sell things. I mean, they chose books 20 years ago, whenever Amazon started, because they're small and portable and easy to market with, you know, a bit of text. And they now own the market, and that's incredible, and it's really amazing. And it's also, that answers your question to a degree.
Yeah, I'm now making some notes about writing a short story about an algorithm where the books just being created. Terrifying stuff. Second one was leading from the question that was about how you got into publishing. If anyone was looking to start work within your company, with your publisher, what advice would you give to anyone in the room when approaching publishers to market yourself, sell yourself?
Okay. There are a few things. The first thing to do is something that I sort of touched on a bit in the presentation, which is to develop and own your niche. So I tell every work experience person, every intern who comes through wherever I've ever worked, we sit down, we have a coffee, and I ask them what they want to do, and they always say editorial, which is great. I ask them what they want to acquire and publish. And by and large, people will say, I have no idea, I kind of like everything. And I mean, that's totally fine. I'm a total reading omnivore, I will read basically anything. However, my first bit of advice is always, always, always to just be honest with yourself about what kind of book or books it is, what genre it is that you want to publish for the next 5 or 10 or 20 years. Because you will be reading a lot of them, and you will be writing copy for a lot of them, and you will be going to conferences and conventions and talking about them, and you will have to know authors and agents, and you will have to know what the bestsellers are, but you also have to know what the best-selling self-published versions of those are. You have to know what the trends are. So all of that sort of deep knowledge of your particular genre is something that you really need to sort of at least think about a bit before you get into publishing. It's certainly what I look for when I'm talking to people who want to get into publishing. I want to know what it is that they specifically want to publish. And you don't, these things change, obviously. I mean, you're not going to be the same person 5 years from now that you are at this moment. So obviously your feelings about, say, science fiction and fantasy might be very different 5 years from now than they are right now. That said, if you come to me saying, I would love to get into publishing, I'd love to be an editor, I don't know what I want to edit, that sort of says to me that you need to sort of go back and think about it a bit. If you come to me and say, I'd like to be an editor, I really want to be a science fiction editor. Science fiction is great, it's where it's at. That's great. My next question, of course, would be, fabulous. What's the last science fiction novel you've read? And that's, yeah, so once you make your claim about what it is that you're interested in doing and how you want to do it, do your research, back it up, develop your niche. So lay the groundwork before you come in to talk to your contact in publishing and sort of be knowledgeable enough. And obviously, I'm not going to expect you to have read 500 years worth of science fiction and fantasy novels, but at least be sort of conversant in The Martian and Dune or whatever. So that's all really important. The way to get started is the really horrible word that everybody hates, and that's network. So, like this afternoon, after I finally stopped talking and we all stand around and have a beer, that's great. That's a really, really, really good time to just sort of like get in there and say, hi, my name is X, and I would be really interested in doing an internship program. Do you guys offer that sort of thing? And I could say, absolutely we do. Hand you my card if I remembered to bring any. That's so networking. And you don't just have to network at events like these, obviously. If you're genuinely interested in going into publishing, go to signings at bookstores, just sort of like, go sort of get the feel for it. There's always going to be somebody from the publisher in addition to the author at a signing. So if a favorite author of yours is going to be signing at Waterstone Piccadilly, just go and check it out and, you know, sort of get the lay of the land. You don't have to introduce yourself to anybody if you don't want to, but just sort of like see how the publisher is sort of moving around. Very often it's more than one person from the publisher. I try to attend certainly the London-based publicity events that my authors do. And you know, nobody's necessarily going to know who I am, but I'm there. And that's often true for a lot of sort of signings. Launches, if you ever get invited to a book launch or you ever have the opportunity to go, again, really good chance just to sort of schmooze. And then finally is the most important thing to do is really to just keep an eye out for work experience and internship opportunities. And just, you know, sort of dip your foot in and see how you like it. That helps. Anything else? Shall we get our beer and network? Thanks so much, guys.